Well, welcome back to GLBC Connections. Today we look at the Gospel of Mark, chapter 15, verses 21 through 32. A good way to start this portion of the Gospel would be to read Psalm 22. It allows us to enter into the suffering of Jesus in a tangible way and experience just the deep sorrow and suffering that he experienced. And so Psalm 22 starts off with the famous words in Mark, my God, why have you forsaken me? And it enters into a lament, a sorrowful psalm of suffering. Some think that Jesus probably recited the entire psalm on the cross, not just that one line. And so get a really deep sense of how he suffered. And so if you read chapter 22 of the Psalms, you see lots of parallels that they gambled for his clothing, that he was pierced in his hands and his feet, that he was thirsty. And we see that here in, in Mark chapter 15. It would be a really good way to get you prepared to read Mark's snapshots of Jesus' suffering and going to the cross. Mark almost has us feel like we are witnesses of the event. And so Jesus is not speaking to us, we're just seeing the record of the event, and they're brief and very tight in his narrative approach. But the first snapshot we see is Simon who picks up the cross. Listen to it, verse 21. A certain man named from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country. And so we think he might have been a working man coming back home in the morning. Maybe he was traveling. And anyways, they forced him to carry the cross. And he does this and delivers it to the place of the skull, to the place called Golgotha. We read this moment of Simon picking up the cross of Jesus. We can't help but remember what Jesus said earlier in the book, and he said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." Mark doesn't make any clear connection to what Jesus says earlier in the book, but I think as readers of the narrative of this historical record of who Jesus was and what he calls us to, I think it would be silly not to make that connection and understand that Jesus calls us to lay our lives down to follow him, because he would do the same. He would lay his life down. And that really delivers us to the second snapshot we'll look at today. It's where Jesus is on the cross. And two times he is mocked, and really they tell him, why don't you just come down? If you are who you say you are, why don't you come down? And it's just so important for us to see that Christ led the way in his sacrifice, and he did not come down. He took upon himself the sin of the world, and he was forsaken by the Father, and he did what he was called to do. So verse 27 says, they crucified two rebels with him, one on his right and one on his left. It's just a terrible place for him to be. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "So, you who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, come down from the cross and save yourself." And so that's the first one. In the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. He saved others, they said, but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe. Those crucified with him also heaped insults on him. And so not only is he receiving mocks from the crowds, not only is he being insulted by the chief priests and the teachers. He's being mocked by the soldiers. He's being mocked by the men who are being crucified on his left and his right. And the consistent call is, if you are who you say you are, why don't you just come on down? And Jesus doesn't. He stays. He goes to the very end. He fulfills his calling. So as we enter this Lent season, as you watch this video, today is the beginning of Lent, and there'll be people all around with ashes on their forehead in the shape of the cross. It's a time where Christians begin to reflect and sacrifice and enter into the story of Jesus and his going to the cross. And so as we enter this Lenten season that takes us to the cross and ultimately the resurrection, it's so good for us with Psalm 22 to consider that Jesus went to the cross and he did not come down, that he gave his life on behalf of us for our ransom and for our forgiveness when he could have turned away from it, but he didn't. So we give him praise and we have great gratitude. Well, we hope you enjoy and think deeply about who Jesus is today in Mark chapter 15. I pray that you take up your cross and follow him. See you next time.